Alright, this is the Show Me for Unit 4. So a question is, why do we have a nervous system? So there are many reasons why we do. One is it coordinates the body's actions. It also transmits signals to and from different parts of the body. And it's for senses and sensory input. And there are different types. There is the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system, which is all nervous tissue outside of the central nervous system. So neurons are cells specialized for long-distance transmission of electrical stimuli throughout the body. They are the structural and functional unit of the nervous system. And so they have dendrites, which are these processes out here. And they also have an axon, which is this part, and this transmits signals away from the soma, but the dendrites transmit incoming impulses. And a collection of neuron bodies is called a nucleus in the central nervous system or a ganglion in the peripheral nervous system. So there are functional classes. There are sensory neurons that convey information from the body to the central nervous system. There are interneurons, which convey sensory information from one neuron to another within the central nervous system. There are efferent neurons, which convey information from the CNS to effector organs. And then there are motor neurons, which are effector neurons. So there are structural classes of them. So unipolar is a single stem divided into a dendrite and axon. They're mainly sensory. And then there are bipolar, which are two processes, usually at opposite ends. And these are also sensory, but they are the least common. And then there are multipolar, which are multiple processes associated with the cell body, and these are the most common. So, microglia, it's these red dots in this picture. They are the smallest glial cells. They perform phagocytosis. They are the principal immune system component within the brain, and they also clean the system. While astrocytes, which is the green one right there, it's the smallest They have multiple end feet. They pass nutrients between blood vessels and neurons. They hold neurons in place, control chemical environment surrounding neurons, and they are the most abundant type of glial cell. So these are ependymal cells. These are the cilia of the ependymal cells. So what these do is they produce cerebrospinal fluid, and they are in the choroid plexus. And cerebrospinal fluid cushions the brain and allows buoyancy. So, onto the oligodendroglia and the Schwann cells. So, oligodendrocytes, which are these, they wrap many axons and are found within the central nervous system. And then these are the Schwann cells, and they wrap one axon and are found within the peripheral nervous system. And the myelin is a substance that wraps axons to insulate them. They are mostly made of water and lipids versus protein. And what myelination does is it increases the speed of communication. It insulates the impulse so it doesn't leak out. And then there's also something called saltatory conduction, which means the impulses jump between the nodes of Ranvier and across sheaths from node to node, but not all the neurons are myelinated. So, nerve impulses. So, nerve impulses are electrical signals that travel within the plasma membrane, and the current is largely from sodium entering the neuron. And this happens when a membrane depolarizes because at resting potential, the interior is slightly negative. And there are two types of electrical signals. There's graded potential, which is a wave of potential that is proportional to the magnitude of stimulus. And then it's used for shorter distances because it degrades quickly. And it has ligand-gated ion channels. And then Action potential is an all or none depolarization that is propagated along nerve fibers without degradation. This happens in axons and through voltage-gated ion channels. So transmission. So synapses are the gaps between the junctions of neurons, and you can see that right there. When the impulse reaches the axon terminal, neurotransmitters are released, and then it can initiate the impulse on the next neuron, and it's electrical in a neuron and chemical in a neurotransmitter. So the peripheral nervous system, it has spinal nerves and cranial nerves. So these are the spinal nerves. As you see, they go through there. And then the dorsal root is this part, and the ventral root is this part. And the dorsal root are afferent fibers, so it brings the signal to the spinal cord, while the ventral root sends it away from the spinal cord. And then the cranial nerves, those are to and from the brain case. So spinal nerves are sequentially arranged and numbered by association with the vertebral column. And then, so cranial nerves, we'll go over here. So cranial nerves, they have different functions. So they can be sensory, motor, or mixed nerve fibers. And they can be special or general. So the cranial nerves are nervus terminalis, olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, auditory, glossopharyngeal, vagus, spinal accessory, and hypoglossal. So on to the extraocular muscles. So the extraocular muscles, the axis is tilted, and the obliques aid in the action of inferior rectus and superior rectus. So they're paired, so the inferior rectus would be paired with the superior oblique, and the superior rectus would be paired with the inferior oblique. So the vagus nerve. This is a mixed nerve, so information goes both to the organs and to the nervous system. And what this nerve does is, like for example, the brain or the stomach tells the brain the current state of the stomach, and then the brain sends signals back to the stomach so the stomach can do whatever action it needs. So it's stomach to brain to stomach. And then there are functions of the peripheral nervous system. So there is a somatic reflex arc. This is the short reflex, and for example, like somebody steps on a pin, it goes through a very short loop, sends a signal back to the muscle, you pick your foot up. And then there is the visceral reflex arc, which there are multiple pathways. This is the long pathway, or long reflex. So onto the autonomic nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which is on this side. It prepares the body for stressful situations by changing many visceral functions. This is the fight or flight part of the nervous system. So it will increase heart rate and blood pressure, decrease digestive processes. It's adrenergic, so it uses epinephrine and norepinephrine. And then the parasympathetic is, it returns the body to the restful state. So this is called rest and digest. So this increases digestive processes and decreases heart rate and blood pressure, for example. And then this is cholinergic, so it uses acetylcholine. But the sympathetic and parasympathetic, they are antagonistic to each other, and most organs get double innervation. Really quick on this, it all depends on what neurotransmitter is at the effector, depending on whether or not it will increase or decrease heart rate and digestion, etc. So, let's see, the sympathetic nervous system. Yeah, right. So, I don't know why that won't focus. All right, so the sympathetic nervous system, the way that the preganglionic neuron signals the postganglionic neuron is through acetylcholine. And the postganglionic neuron then secretes a different neurotransmitter such as epinephrine and norepinephrine. And then neurons can only respond to chemical stimuli, and epinephrine speeds it up, and acetylcholine slows it down. And then the preganglionic neuron has innervation on the medulla of the adrenal, and it stimulates chromaffin cells to produce adrenaline. So how the CNS receives information is through interoceptors, proprioceptors, and exteroceptors. Interoceptors respond to internal stimuli. Proprioceptors respond to limb position, joint angles, and muscle stretching. And then exteroceptors are sensory receptors that respond to stimuli in external environments. Quick notes about the layout of the CNS. So the CNS is hollow. The central canal enlarges into ventricles. And the brain and spinal cord are surrounded by meninges. So the outermost layer is the dura mater, and then the middle layer is the arachnoid, and then there's the pia mater, which is the innermost layer. So the blood-brain barrier is the separation of circulating blood from brain extracellular fluid. So there are tight junctions between endothelial cells of vessels, and the only things that pass are oxygen, CO2, and hydrophobic molecules such as lipids. And things that don't pass are microscopic objects and hydrophobic molecules. And glucose moves across via transporter proteins.